Americans should not approach the proposed Palestinian state as honest brokers, impartial brokers. They should not approach it as pro-Israelis or pro-Palestinians. They should approach it as American patriots who are concerned about American own interest. Moreover, anyone who considers the proposed Palestinian state should or is facing a challenge to overcome the temptation set by an alternate speculative positive scenario or reality over the actual Middle East reality. When it comes to alternate speculative reality, we keep hearing from State Department folks, the State Department establishment, from the so-called elite media, and certainly from West European policymakers, that a Palestinian state would be a reformed Palestinian state, a state which would abide by peaceful coexistence, would abandon its vision which mandates Palestinians to uproot the so-called illegitimate Jewish Zionist entity, and would be good faith negotiator. Now that sounds great. There is a problem. And the problem is that we're not dealing with speculation, we're dealing with reality. And on this issue, we see a remarkable difference between the attitude or the conduct of West European policymakers and the vast majority of the State Department establishment, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, etc., which has embraced genuinely the proposed Palestinian state. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, you see Arab leaders. And Arab leaders since 1948 have limited themselves to talking positively about the proposed Palestinian state, but refraining from any tangible or effective work. In fact, the late King Hussein of Jordan, upon hearing the Oslo Accord, the Oslo Agreement, which relocated the PLO from Tunisia to the heartland of the land of Israel, to Judea, Samaria, to Gaza, East Jerusalem, he called the head of the Israeli Mossad at that time, Shabtai Shavit, and yelled at him, "Why are you sentencing me, the Hashemite regime, to death? Don't you know that a Palestinian state west of the river would doom us, the Hashemites, east of the river?" That statements were echoed also in October of 1994 during the ceremony of signing the Israel-Jordan peace accord with Prime Minister Rabin and King Hussein and President Clinton in attendance. And at that time, the top tier of the Jordanian military approached their Israeli colleagues once again, warning them that if Israel allows a Palestinian state west of the river, it's going to doom the Hashemite regime, the pro-Western, the pro-US Hashemite regime. Anyone who is familiar with the demography, the ethnicity, the religious structure, the tribal structure, the recent history of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan would know why are the Hashemites so concerned, and again, irrespective of their public statements. And certainly, when you consider today the increasing efforts by the Ayatollah regime to topple the Hashemite regime in Jordan, combined with the Muslim Brotherhood very strong presence in Jordan, and again, attempting systematically to destabilize, to topple the Hashemite regime, reinforced by Palestinian terror organizations in Jordan, exacerbated by 2 million Syrian refugees in northern Jordan. Many of them are negative elements, terrorists, drug traffickers, certainly not allies of the Hashemite regime. And you add to that the highly fragmented Bedouin community, which is the power base of the Hashemite. The outcome of a Palestinian state is very obvious, toppling the Hashemite regime in Jordan. Once you topple the Hashemite regime in Jordan, you transform Jordan into a lawless state, an uncontrollable state, a chaotic state in the vein of Libya, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, which would transform Jordan into another platform of anti-Western, anti-US Islamic terrorism, some terrorists supported by Iran, some terrorists supported by ISIS, some terrorists supported by Muslim Brotherhood, some by Palestinians, and it's not going to be limited only to Jordanian territory. It's going to trigger very powerful ripple effect. First of all, western side towards Sinai Peninsula, and from there into Egypt, where the Muslim Brotherhood are going to benefit greatly from the transformation of Jordan into a terrorist state, threatening to topple the pro-US Sisi regime in Egypt, and certainly ripple effects are going to reach the southern frontier or southern border of Jordan, the Arabian Peninsula, threatening the survival of every single pro-US oil-producing Arab regime, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and even Kuwait and Oman. And we are talking about an area which is not only the #1 epicenter of anti-American Islamic terrorism, aiming to reach all the way to the US homeland, but we're talking about an area or platform of 48% of global oil reserves, which could be transformed as far as control from pro-US control to anti-US control, benefiting China, Russia, the Ayatollah regime, the Muslim Brotherhood, and dealing a major setback to US economy, the price at the pump. But moreover, Arabian Peninsula is a critical intersection of trade routes between Asia and West Europe. This would also threaten the economy of Europe. Arabs are aware of that potential, and therefore they limit their support to pro-Palestinian talk, but not walk. Moreover, and lastly, they're also aware that historically, systematically, the Palestinian leadership always sided with anti-Western radical elements in the world. It was Nazi Germany, then it was the Soviet bloc, then it was Ayatollah Khomeini, then it was the Palestinians training Latin American terrorists, European, Asian, African terrorists, certainly close ties with North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, and that is the reason why the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has not flexed his military or political or even financial muscles to an extent that would be a game changer on the Palestinian issue, and they know a Palestinian state would benefit the arch enemies of moderate Arab regimes and would only provide tailwind to the radical elements, adding fuel, not water, to the Middle East fire. The mountain ridges of Judea and Samaria to Israel would have a similar but much greater impact than annexing the Golan Heights. And I mentioned that from the American, not Israeli perspective. When President Trump recognized the Golan Heights as an integral part of Israel, he did it because of the positive effect, the positive impact on advancing American interest. Israel's control of the Golan Heights, which is a tri-border area between Israel, Syria, and Jordan, serves as a most critical defense line of the pro-US Hashemite regime in Jordan. Israel's control of the mountain ridges of Judea and Samaria serves as a super first line of defense for the Hashemite regime in Jordan. If you look for American interest in the Middle East, the number one feature of Israel, which has transformed Israel into a unique force multiplier for the US, has been Israel's posture of deterrence, which was almost non-existent until 1967, and Israel until 1967 was perceived to be a burden on American interest, a liability for America. Came 1967 because of Israel's control of the mountain ridges of the Golan Heights in the north and Judea and Samaria in the center, that transformed Israel into an invaluable strategic asset for the US, deterring terrorism, deterring wars, or I should say minimizing the threat of war and terrorism, and serving as a very critical defense line for the Hashemite regime in Jordan. For Israel to retreat from Judea and Samaria, from the mountains of Judea and Samaria, would mean for the US to lose a very, very, I would say, irreplaceable strategic asset, which means Israel's posture of deterrence. I would compare it to cutting off the nose to spite the face. And the US should not cut off its nose to spite its face. And one more element here, when one refers to the pro-Palestinian state elements as being addicted to speculative alternate reality, it means, among other things, that they ignore willingly, enthusiastically, the track record of the Palestinians and subordinate track record to wishful thinking. The track record of the Palestinians has rendered them, transformed them into a role model of intra-Arab subversion, intra-Arab terrorism, and intra-Arab treachery. 1950s, they were hosted by Egypt, but collaborated with Muslim Brotherhood, terrorizing their host country. They had to run away from Egypt to Syria. They were allowed to terrorize Israel from Syria, but after a few years, they joined forces with the Muslim Brotherhood of Syria, terrorizing their own Arab host government, and they had to run away from Syria to Jordan. They were allowed to terrorize Israel, but by 1970, they tried to take over control of Jordan, toppling the Hashemite regime, which triggered a civil war, Black September, and they had to run away from Jordan to Lebanon. They plundered southern Lebanon, Then they moved on to Beirut. They triggered a number of civil wars in Syria. They were the cause for the Christians to plea with Syria to invade militarily Lebanon in order to snatch the Syrians, the Christians, from the jaws of the PLO, and at the end they were expelled from Lebanon in 1982, and last and not least, in 1990, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, which at that time was the most generous Arab host of Palestinians, absorbing some 400,000 Palestinians, the same Palestinians stabbed the back of their host Kuwait, joining the invasion by Saddam Hussein, heralding Saddam Hussein as a modern-day Salah ad-Din, the mythological Muslim military leader, and that was the reason for Sheikh Sabah of Kuwait, upon being restored to power by the Americans, the first thing he did was expelling almost all 400,000 Palestinians from Kuwait. The Arabs are aware of it. The Arabs do not forget, the Arabs do not forgive, and they dispense with talk, which is very cheap in the Middle East. In the Middle East, they say, on words one does not pay custom, so why not talk? But they do not walk. And one example, one sentence, November 2023, the height of the current Israel-Hamas war, Saudi Arabia hosted a joint summit, Arab League and the World Organization of Islamic Countries. The Palestinians, Iran, and Algeria proposed a resolution to stop right away all diplomatic, financial, defense, and touristic ties with Israel. The resolution was defeated by Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, South Sudan, and few other non-Arab countries, because they do not want to take any tangible walk on behalf of Palestinian state, which would be self-destructive as far as moderate pro-US Arab regimes.